Hi, welcome everyone to another Innovation Forum webinar. This is another webinar in our Sustainability Communications and Stakeholder Engagement series. So just for everyone who might not know of the series, it was created late last year by my colleague Ellen and I as a call from our network that wanted, they see how we facilitate conferences, webinars on a range of issues on business sustainability. But this series primarily focuses inwards within companies, as practitioners in the space. We talk a lot about what work is being done. This one's more focusing on how do we communicate, how to make sure people are aware of it. With communication comes education, all parts that we're going to be discussing over the next hour. So, yeah, we held a webinar in last year on B2B communication, so with B2B companies, with B2C companies, and then this time we get to have four fantastic NGO speakers joining the panel. So yeah, this is run by the Stakeholder Engagement and Sustainability Communications team at Innovation Forum. So if you want to be involved in the next one, feel free to sign up using the form below. It's a free community. It's just to let you know the next time we host a workshop or a webinar or anything. And if you want to have more information on how we can perhaps help you communicate on your work as you in your organizations, also get in touch. We work with a range of companies in various different ways. So happy to talk through any potential ways that we might work with you on these topics. So for today's webinar, we'll be looking at building credibility in sustainability storytelling, how NGOs can strengthen trust through transparent communication. So for this, I have the pleasure of being joined by four fantastic speakers. We have Kate, Director of Brand Impact and Communications at Fairtrade America, Courtney, Board Director at Green Seal, Lorraine Pepper at Regenerative Senior Advisor to Regenerative Organic Alliance, and Jackie Marks, Senior Communications and Public Affairs Manager at MSC. So just a big welcome to all. Yeah, and just a few housekeeping notes for everyone who's just joined. Welcome. Just like in most Innovation Forum webinars, we'll be having sort of a conversation between the five of us for the first little bit, just to get an idea of how you're working in the space. But then really, this is an opportunity for anyone listening to ask your questions. So put them into the chat. Don't wait until the end. Put them in the chat, and I might just kind of weave them in through. We try to dedicate at least of this half of the session to Q&A. So please, throughout the session, feel free to add your questions. Ideally, if you add who you would want directed at, that's also helpful, or if you want it to all speakers, just so that we know. But yeah, as we go through the full session, feel free to add your questions. So for the start, I'm going to turn to each of the speakers to kind of introduce themselves, their work in this space, and then kind of introduce a few of the different themes that we'll be covering for the next hour in just an intro sort of space. So, Kate, if I could turn to you first, if you could introduce yourself and your role at Fairtrade America, and then what would you describe as credible storytelling and what that looks like at Fairtrade to kick us
Absolutely.
off?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name's Kate Stritzinger. I'm the Director of Brand Impact and Communications at Fairtrade America. So kind of a mix of marketing, communications, and licensing. So we actually work on claims related topics as well. So my background is I've always worked at nonprofits, working on social justice communication and fundraising. So that's like the lens that I look at this world through is through social justice communications. Fairtrade America is the US branch of Fairtrade International, which you can see. This is our logo. That's us. I know there are a bunch of different certifications out there, but we're the ones with the green and the blue. And we are the US branch of Fairtrade International. So we're a big network across the world. We work with over 2 million farmers and workers. And our certification is really about making sure that farmers get a fair deal for the products that they sell. And we work mostly in coffee, cocoa, and bananas. So tropical goods, things that end up in composite products are typically like where we work, but we do work with over 300 different commodities. So kind of pretty broad reaching at the intersection of social justice, environmental justice, trade justice, all those things kind of combined because we see them as completely linked. So in terms of what I see as credible communication and what we see as Fairtrade America, there are a couple of attributes. So is it clear? Is it concise, precise? And is it externally validated? I mean, Fairtrade is both an NGO and a certification. So while we work directly with farmers ourselves, we also work with brands to make sure that they're like following fair trade practices. We think external validation is super important for people for keeping brands honest that can afford it. I know it's not a cheap investment, but it's a really important way to keep us all honest, I think. think, and keep it moving forward because we as an external entity have the ability to keep our eye on those bigger, meatier issues while you can stay focused on what your company is doing. I think beyond that, is it advancing the mission? So I know that historically there has been, to be able to appeal to different audiences, we kind of adapt our messaging to fit maybe their knowledge level. And it's not always honoring the people that are being served by the organization, or who are collaborating with the organization. So like in my mind, if I wouldn't say it to one of the farmers that we work with directly to their face, then I shouldn't be saying it at all. And that's what we encourage brands to do as well. So thinking, while it is a commodity and it is like communicating about a specific product, there's a way to do that that honors the labor, and talent and expertise of the people that we work with. So that's what I see as the biggest three attributes.
Great. I'm looking forward to as we go through all the speakers, seeing how that might differ or probably a lot of agreements there as well. Um, Great. And then there'll be a lot of talk over the next hour also about, the different types of consumers, communicating with consumers, like what does a consumer really look like? There's so many different types. You as Fairtrade America, I wonder if you could give us a little bit of an initial idea of how do you communicate differently across and between, well, within a country as big as America already, but then between continents, just as a little taster before we go into more detail on it.
Absolutely. So my remit is really the US, but I work with communicators across the globe, especially in Europe. And I would say it varies a lot based on the cultural context of what's happening there. I think like really simply, we work with GlobeScan to do consumer research, and you see that the issues that folks care about and why they buy fair trade is different from region to region. And so in Europe, I was just like brushing up on it this morning. The top issues are things like child labor and modern slavery. In the United States, it's pesticides, maybe poverty related issues, but even like the percentage awareness around those issues is quite different. So I think knowing like the organic movement and not non-GMO grew so quickly in the US in the 90s, the parallel path was happening for fair trade in Europe. So I think a lot about like how do we combine our message so we can be more powerful together? But in some ways, it's an interesting nuance of trying to figure out like where is the center of our Venn diagram, like what gets at the heartstrings and really gets to the core of what people are looking for when they're working with us or looking for our certification. So
Yeah, from like an anthropological way, it's so interesting to see what that Venn diagram would look like.
totally.
Thank you, Kate. Lorraine, if I could turn to you, you the same sort of, if you could introduce yourself and your role at ROA, but then if you could talk us through what does credible sustainability storytelling look like for you? You obviously work in textiles, but also food. So if you could give us a bit of an idea, Lorraine.
Absolutely. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here. And, I'm going to echo a lot of what Kate just announced as well. But I'm a farmer first. And so I think that context that comes with the real changes and meaningful things that need to happen at the farm gate are, I'm a farmer first. I've got an organic cotton farm out in West Texas. I'm the co-founder and former CEO of the Textile Exchange. And I've been serving on a couple of boards since I've retired from that. I've been on the Regenerative Organic Alliance board since its inception a few years ago. Also serve as chairman of the board for Cotton Connect, all things making differences at the farm. And the reality is, Tanya, I think you know this, but you can't tell the truth if you don't know the truth. And it is about working with credible third party standards that actually go out there. There's a number of reasons why consumers and brands and governments, there's more pressure in the marketplace than ever on regulations of what's going on. Is there, forced labor? Is there slave labor? Is there child labor? What kind of carbon credits are, is this actually reducing carbon? Or are we having positive impacts? What's happening with our water? What about the animal welfare? And so I'm loving the work with the Regenerative Organic Alliance. I'm again on their board, and I'm serving as a senior advisor to really mobilize the fiber material strategy and the journey to rock. And so that knowing the truth, being able to tell the truth, about what's going on the farm and the supply chain when it comes to meeting very rigorous third-party standards. And regenerative organic certified means organic is the foundation, but we're doing more in-depth work around soils, animal welfare, and certainly the social justice piece. It has to be a holistic solution.
Yeah, thank you. So already the context, the importance of knowing the truth to be able to tell the truth is such a great way of just saying so much in just a small sentence. And the standard certification, all these parts that we'll go through into more detail. I wonder also from your side where regen ag is maybe less known or in terms of consumers, we as practitioners and working in the space might know it quite well, but in terms of consumer dynamics, um, talk us through a little bit of what education plays in that. Like, what does that look like in terms of speaking to consumers? Is that taken into consideration?
It's huge, especially, the word organic looks clearly defined. It's regulated in every country in the world. Just like the word sustainable, what does it mean? It's a continuum, it's, a continuous journey. Regenerative seems to be the new buzzword on like, let's greenwash chemically intensive agriculture. If you're just saying, I'm a regenerative farmer, it's kind of very confusing in the marketplace. I've reviewed 24 different regenerative codes. We'll give them a gold star for doing something around soils. They're all doing some work around soils, but they're still using a lot of herbicides. They're still using, lists of prohibited substances are on the World Health Organization's no list. And so I think you need to be very cautious about the word and claims of regenerative, just regenerative, and make sure that if they are using the word regenerative, and we're partnering with a few that are credible third-party standards, that there is continuous improvement. I had a farmer in California tell me he'd stopped burning his irrigation ditches, and he's regenerative, and I'm like, well, that's a good thing to do, but that is one practice. And so when you really think about that continuum, it needs to be a holistic solution where you are totally eliminating the toxic and persistent chemicals and pesticides and doing the fair thing for your workers and social justice issues and animal welfare. So that education is key for governments of what's going on with new words and regulations. Education is key when it comes to brands and retailers of making honest and truthful claims on their packaging and what they are doing. And it's key for consumers. And I have to say, rock is really growing in especially the natural grocer space. So it is about common, consistent language. And so again, if you don't know what you're doing, it's education is critical. Clear communications, factual information, what is and isn't. And so Regenerative Organic Alliance and the Rock Standard bring the best of both worlds of organic with that additional work in that holistic solution.
Thank you, Lorraine. Already seeing questions come through, so thank you very much. Jackie, if I could turn to you next, if you could introduce yourself in your role at MSC, but then also what does credible storytelling, as a concept look like in your area, in your sector?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'm grateful to be here. So I am the Senior Communications and Public Relations Manager for the Marine Stewardship Council based in the United States. And the Marine Stewardship Council is a global nonprofit organization that incentivizes and rewards sustainable fishing for wild capture fisheries. And we do that through our eco-labeling, our certification and eco-labeling program. So a lot of what Larea and Kate have already said also applies to us being a third-party certification program. And as I said, we focus on wild capture seafood, and our fishery standard has three main principles. It's making sure that fishing fish comes from a healthy population of fish. And we also look at the marine ecosystem where that fish comes from. And we also want to make sure that the fishery is managed properly so it can adapt and change to any environmental conditions and other issues. So we're really looking at this sort of holistic. Larea already said that word. It's looking at all different aspects to make sure that the ocean is really protected when it comes to fishing, and so. what credible storytelling looks like to me is really honest and transparent communications. It's really important that we're thinking about, we're not misleading. We're not, trying to make it look better than it is. We're really honest and clear about what sustainability is. And the way MSC does that is we're very clear about what our definition of sustainability is, and that leans back to the three principles I mentioned earlier of our fishery standard. And I love what Loraya said earlier. Sustainability is a continuous journey, and so I think part of that credible communications too is also having humility about we're not perfect. We're still learning, and things are constantly changing. We depend heavily on marine and fisheries science, and so that is constantly evolving. So really making sure that we are talking about where we're still learning, I think is also really important.
Yeah, the honest approach is one that we particularly enjoyed at Innovation Forum. Um, I know obviously working with brands that are, incorporating the seal, it will be a big part of this conversation as well, and the companies. So I wanted to see if what does that relationship with the brands look like right now? What do you see in terms of their appetite? So you're also on the US side, but yeah, I guess I'll be focused on US, but just more widely, how's that dynamic work?
Yeah, certainly. And I should take a step back and say we have our fisheries standard, so that's for fisheries, and we also have our supply chain standard, our chain of custody standard. So that's for the entire seafood supply chain. And something that we've seen in the last several years is a hesitancy to talk about sustainability claims or sustainability principles that companies are following, brands, retailers, and so forth. Their greenwashing, I think, is now something that most people are familiar with, but green hushing is something that we're seeing more and more of, and that's people that are hesitant or not willing to sort of talk about their sustainability claims or principles for fear of being called out. And so that I think is as damaging as greenwashing because it's really not showing the progress that's happening, and people are afraid, or companies and brands are afraid and hesitant to be able to do that because of intense scrutiny that some have. Especially, we've seen this with climate goals, for example, but it also applies to seafood and just sustainability claims in general. And so, we want to make sure that as I mentioned before, clear or having really clear communications is really important so that there is no way to sort of mischaracterize what their sustainability goals are when it comes to being MSC certified, for example. We're really encouraging those credible environmental claims because it really matters when it comes to consumers and allowing them to have informed choices. So I'm speaking specifically about the U.S. market, but it might be happening in other places as well. But the consumer is really demanding that third-party validation. They want to know where their seafood is coming from, and it's not enough for a company to say, "Yes, we're sustainable." They really want that third-party validation. Like Kate, we do our Globe Scan data. We get consumer insights every 2 years, and so we've seen that increase year over year to make sure that it's not just a brand saying, "Hey, we're sustainable." It's really, "Hey, we're sustainable, and this company has validated that."
I remember years ago hearing about the concept of like the tall poppy syndrome, and then that's now turned into like that's not wanting to say anything out of fear of sticking out and then being asked. So that green hushing has then evolved from that. Um, Thank you, Jackie. Courtney, if I could turn to you then, also to round out the panel, if you could introduce yourself and your role at Green Seal, and then yeah, if you could explain to anyone listening what does credible storytelling look like in your area specifically.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney Holm. I've been working in sustainability for over 20 years, mainly in the FMCG sector, focused on food, personal care, and home care value chains. I'm also a horticulturalist by background. I spent the first kind of 8 years of my career working in ornamental plant production. Um, so I really have two roles in Green Seal. As a member of the board of directors, I provide governance. So that's more about guiding Green Seal's strategic direction and overseeing the finances so that we're supporting our mission to accelerate the adoption of safer and more sustainable products. As the co-chair of the Standard Steering Committee, which is the primary decision-making body for ensuring the technical rigor, credibility, and market acceptance of our standards, my role is more structured around helping us to advance our mission by guiding the development of the standards. And that's really about how we provide transparent, balanced, and consensus based processes to support that governance. And for, I guess, for the audience who aren't familiar with Green Seal, just to give you an understanding of our scale, we operate in over 20 countries with more than 300 companies across approximately 1,700 certified products and about 33,000 SKUs. So, growing in capability, we have primarily focused on cleaning products and out of home cleaning products. And now we're entering more into in home cleaning and also personal care products, and very much so focused on chemicals, safer chemicals, but also, of course, more broadly on environmental and social parameters as well. But we lean on other standards like fair trade and others to help us understand what good looks like in that space. I think that I agree with what everyone has said. I think really to add, for us at Green Seal, we focus on science-based criteria. So science is big for us, and we back up our claims with rigor. And the team have lots of credibility and capability in the scientific realm on certifying products. I would also think that a lot more of the communication that's coming, consumers, they want to understand what's safe and what isn't. And we've seen this as chemical controversies around PFAS and all sorts of other toxicity on chemicals comes to the fore. One of the things that we talk about, as a team is that while one product might be safe from a chemical perspective, what we really don't talk about and what consumers maybe don't think about is that, they're layering products one on top of each other every day. So their exposure is amplified and multiplied. And, can we start to take a look at that holistic picture of what it means from a chemical toxicity for a person or a family throughout the day, and what that means from a health perspective for us, and then also, of course, for the natural environment.
Yeah. Thank you, Courtney. I mean, you mentioned the science part, so I wonder if I could pick your brain a little bit more on how are you communicating science to consumers? What are sort of your best practices? What works well, and what any tips to share with anyone who might be listening?
Yeah, for many years I've had this kind of saying that I've worked on, quite a lot in my practice and how I deliver my work, which is around commercializing the science. And I think it's really important that we commercialize the science, not only of climate change, but all the indicators and impacts that lead to it from an environmental and social perspective. So Green Seal is an interesting certification body, right? Because it sits at the intersection of science, standards, and consumer trust. One of our roles is to help brands feel confident that the claims that they make are grounded in credible science-based criteria, right? But that also gives us a clear view into what builds trust and what undermines it. From our vantage point, really, credibility in sustainability storytelling is about crafting better narratives and more about building systems that can withstand scrutiny. I think as we find more skepticism, in the community, what we really need to do is respond to regulations as they tighten, but also to increase trust. And the only way to do that is through earn it, really, through proof, transparency, and consistency over time.
All right. Thank you, Courtney. So we've now heard from each of the speakers a little bit. So for anyone listening, you can see the breadth that we have covered between all of the panelists. So maybe just there's a lot that I want to cover from each of your points, but maybe just staying on the point that you mentioned on greenwashing, Courtney. I wonder if maybe Jackie, from your side, what do you see as when we're talking about claims, science, greenwashing, what do you see as the biggest risks we're facing today? Is it on overclaiming, underclaiming, undercommunicating, confusion for consumers? Anything you can share there?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think both are a big risk, both green hushing and greenwashing. Not providing accurate information to the consumer is incredibly damaging. When brands or companies mislead consumers, whether that is by underreporting or overreporting, it really loses that trust, both in the brand but also in the certification. It minimizes it sort of it just gives the value, it diminishes the value rather. And so I think both are a big risk. And so I mean, we've already said it, really having that credible communications is really important. Being able to talk about it, being able to be honest about it is very important. Consumers are very savvy, and they don't want to be misled. And it's a really easy way to lose a customer when a company says it is one thing but shows that it is another thing. And so, I think both are potentially very damaging when it comes to building that consumer trust and building credibility in both brands, but in third-party eco-labels like ours.
Yeah, Kate, I wonder if you had anything from your side on that.
Yeah, I mean, from my vantage point, I totally agree with Jackie. It can be very damaging, and I think in some ways, like greenwashing and claims that are not accurate have the ability to set unrealistic expectations with consumers about what's possible from a specific product. Like a specific product will never save the world. It will never stop child hunger. It will never make sure that everybody has water. Like that is not realistic. And I think that by setting realistic expectations, like we can do a lot to help people understand the nuance. Child labor is not going to end tomorrow, but if all brands were to suddenly choose a better pricing system, then things we could actually take away at some of these issues. I think in the US context, it's really fascinating. The like exceptionalism of like my company is doing it best. But if we don't have a floor for what at least bare minimum is, and I think that's really what we're trying to do at Fair Trade America is like build a floor so we can stand on that and continue to grow more from there. I think without that, we're really like missing out. And the US being a very litigious country, there's so much like potential for like getting sued and things like that on things that like may or may not be illegal or, yeah.
Yeah, a lot to say on that area. Larry, I wonder, you from your side, focusing on the standards and proving claims, but then also wanting to tell impactful stories on farm. Do you see that there's sort of a focus maybe on like, are we focusing too much on proving claims rather than telling impact stories? Are we moving in that direction, or are we still finding the balance between the two?
I think it's partly the balance. The other thing is access to information. I noticed there's a question on the blockchain and this and that. It's like, how do you carry that information through that supply chain? From me, the farmer, to that shirt you're wearing, for example. So I think that there's some companies that do have access to their impact data and what's going on. Um, but overall, most people are still in brands are disconnected from their supply chains, and they may know their tier one or their whoever's making their shirts or their packaged goods, but really connecting with the farmer to understand the nuances of what's happening there when it comes to all the issues that we've talked about. So I think technology is evolving to support that on one hand. On the other hand, that's a lot of burden to put on a farmer for all this impact data as well. And what's the value of that? Because right now the brands want all the impact data to report to the regulations and the governments and their consumers. And here I am, Kate's, in the front row of this, of how do you get a fair price to the farmer for the investment that they're making and make sure everyone's paying a living wage all the way through. I would remind you, and Tanya, you've heard me say this before, that the current price paradigm is what's created the pollution and the poverty and the problems. Until we start really understanding the value, and that comes through the impacts, that we've got to move out of the price paradigm into a value paradigm. And that's going to require the education, it's going to require communication to really understand the value of the benefits of what we're doing at the farm gate through all the mills and the manufacturing. And it's a challenge. And I think there's some companies that are doing a great job of connecting the dots and telling the story. but they have to have the facts to back it up as well. Otherwise, it's greenwashing. So I think there are solutions, proven solutions, but it takes effort to put that all together.
Thank you, Laura. I'm looking through the questions and trying to figure out. There's a lot of different parts that focus for that could be applied to any of you. But I wonder, there's a question from Richard on the big picture, and I wonder maybe Kate, that could be a good one to point to you. But if any of the other speakers want to jump in, please do. Richard asks big picture question: what do you think are the opportunities or risks for NGOs as trusted communicators? Edelman's Trust Barometer consistently shows NGOs and business are the most trusted sources, compared with media and governments, with NGOs being seen as more ethical and businesses as more competent, reliable. How can NGOs capitalize on this position? Do you have any thoughts, Kate?
I think we can be brave. I think we can try to push the narrative forward and avoid the compulsion to make it seem like a rosy picture when it isn't. I think our job is to add nuance because we have the luxury of talking about things beyond a package. We have more space to do that kind of work, so we get to add nuance. That like while yes, X social justice issue is not solved, here are the things that we've done to take away at it. And I think we have a strong responsibility to maintain trust and be honest and share the good and the bad of things that work and things that didn't work. And I'm hopeful that as like communicators, we can kind of keep that going because there is competition and nobody wants to look like you're not doing enough, right? And it's an interesting space to be in both. And then coming from a more social justice background, there's a bit more grace, I think, in organization, having worked in organizations that didn't have a certification tied to it with this like public perception or this need to be able to shrink things down to a more corporate language. And I would challenge that like the NGO sector, I mean, the folks in this room are like best in class on this. But I think that that's something we need to continue to do and to not be afraid of not reaching the end goal when we all know the end goal is not easy to change. We're talking about issues that have existed for decades, hundreds, thousands of years in some cases of colonization and exploitation and all of that. So I think the only way that we like what Lorraine was saying, you can't tell the truth if you don't know it, and we need to be the tellers of the truth.
Yeah. Thank you, Kate. Courtney, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I want to, we talk a lot about greenwashing and greenhushing inside Green Seal, and we've come to the conclusion that it really stems from one root issue, which is fear scrutiny. And I think the solution to both greenwashing and greenhushing is better substantiation, not silence. So, how do we as, NGOs, how do we help with that? I think we set clear boundaries, we provide qualified language, that third party verification that allows the organizations to communicate honestly without overstating impact. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to help them innovate within guardrails, to correct some of the issues that are obvious and evident to all of us in value chains. And also, like the work that Fair Trade does and the work that Lorraine is doing, and also Jackie, how do we support that upstream value chain to make things better for them so that they can continue providing these valuable products to us? We all need to eat. And I think with climate change impacts coming to the fore and them being on the front line and feeling all those things, those value chains are at risk. And a lot of the brands know that risk and they look to us to support them to mitigate it.
Tanya, if I could just add briefly, it's also really important to remember that trust is earned. And so it's really our currency and our reputation that we really need to maintain when it comes to maintaining that trust. So it's so important for us to keep that sort of as our North Star to make sure that we can continue to be trusted, and that both consumers and brands, stakeholders can continue to trust what we're doing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot more to cover there. So if there's any additional questions, do let us know. But I wonder if, like, staying on that consumer dynamic on, how to measure what does trust actually look like? How does it change over time? What indicators are we actually focusing on? I'd love to know, how are you measuring that change I mean, there's change in awareness, change in trust, change in understanding. Um, Maybe I could turn to a lot of you, but maybe Jackie, if I could keep you first on that. How are you measuring this? I know you mentioned a little bit about your GlobeScan surveys, for example, but anything more you can add?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, measurement is so important. It really helps us see where we were, where we are, where we're going. And so every 2 years, we undertake a survey with the company GlobeScan. It helps us to reach the American consumer. And I say American consumer, but this is actually a survey that we run across the globe in many different markets. The last time we did this was in 2024, and we are going to be doing it again this year. I believe it actually might be in market right now. And what it does is it helps us really understand, what the challenges are that consumers are facing. What are they up against? What's their mindset when it comes to sustainability? And then specifically their sort of attitudes and feelings towards seafood and consuming seafood and choosing seafood. And so what we've seen is this last survey showed us the highest level of sort of concern for the ocean. It was at 91%. So that's for the US, just for the US. But that mirrors what we're seeing in other markets across the globe. And so, that really helps us gauge sort of where consumers are and their mindset. And it also helps us then communicate to them and like help them sort of ease some of those concerns by providing that communication about, how they can play a role in supporting ocean health by choosing sustainable seafood. So those metrics are really, really important for our work. This last survey also showed that there's high demand for independent verification at 70%. And we've also seen the understanding of what the MSC Eco label is in our market. And that says a lot. In the US, we are still, we're not quite where Europe is in terms of sustainability awareness. So seeing that grow and seeing that sort of get closer and closer to where Europe is really encouraging. So, it really, again, helps us reach those people in the United States who want to do the right thing. And, to be clear, the US is a giant market. It's very large, and we can't reach everyone. And so part of our efforts and what we get from this research is understanding where we can make sure that our message resonates with people. What are the markets where we can have the most impact? We're not trying to convert everyone in the United States to sustainable seafood consumers. That's just not realistic. And so having that data and having those metrics in terms of where we can make an impact really helps us be much more focused in our efforts.
Was it Kate? You also do surveys, right, to track the change and measure that change. Was there anything that you wanted to add on that?
Sure. So I mean, the same thing that Jackie does. We actually are on the off year of their Globe Scan. In addition to Globe Scan, we also combine that with SPINS data here in the U.S. just to see how sales are actually performing on these different products that we work in. Beyond that, I would say on like our like local consumer work, we're thinking a lot about, are people taking the actions that we want them to take? Is fair trade something they buy once a week, once a month? And can they activate in different ways? Can they influence their businesses that they shop at regularly? The brands that they love, can they get them to be fair trade as well? So moving forward, we're moving more into that space of trying to influence or having consumers use both choice and voice in their appreciation for fair trade, and sort of advance it more of an advocacy perspective as well.
Larry, there was a question from Carlotta, which you answered a little bit in text, but I wonder if you could give, to the rest of the participants here an answer. It was on considering the absence of regenerative agriculture goal definition, what do you consider as the best practice out there? So if we're talking how do you communicate on the work, like a seal, a method, a certificate is what she mentions. Any thoughts on how do we, better communicate using those tools?
Well, I think that third party certified, those logos tell a story. And, to what Kate's saying, we also use spins data is primarily right now in the food sector with, the Whole Foods, the natural grocers, that part of things. But consumers are looking again, that trust that Jackie mentioned, that trust is earned. And so these logos do mean something. And so that communication to consumers that they can see that and that, okay, that aligns with my values. So I think it's really important, again, the third party certified, just like Jackie was talking about, consumers, they feel like they, claim so that their choice is making a difference. And here's the difference they can expect. And I understand the whole big picture piece, but you start somewhere and you start one step at a time. You start with a product. I'm shifting out of chemically intensive. I'm moving, every sheet in my house is going to be organic and regenerative. So it's like, where do you start? And because that becomes that ripple effect. And yeah, and of course, I'm going to say Regenerative Organic Alliance is the tip of the spear when it comes to agricultural standards that are applying it in a holistic way at the land. But it's, Marine Stewardship Council's doing it there. You've got the Forest Stewardship Council. There's, the plethora of all the different things. One of my favorite sayings is like complex problems require multifaceted solutions. So yes, there are a lot of standards out there, but we're all focused in a unique area. So I think collaboration is important, that we're philosophically aligned and driving toward this meaningful change. And but yeah, it is complex.
Yeah. With whenever we talk about standardization, obviously the question on like confusion, too much, how do we make sure that this stays, understandable to consumers come up. So I wanted to turn that question and that thought to the panel. Maybe Courtney, if you have any thoughts on, how do we make sure that this is, being perceived in the right way and doing the impact that we want it to do.
I want to just add something to the
Yeah.
conversation that we just had around trust. And I mean, yes, we believe that trust should be measured not just by awareness and engagement, but also by understanding. And I think this is how it relates to the plethora of so many certifications, right? Do consumers really understand what those certifications mean? Do they understand what's being communicated to them? And do they show confidence and regular behavior that can be measured over time? And I think we all use GlobeScan. I mean, God bless GlobeScan, right? They give us that critical eye into the consumer voice. I think another useful test that we've pulled on over the years is defensibility. So could this claim stand up to scrutiny from a regulator, from another NGO, or a competitor? And I think when we think about credibility from a consumer perspective, but also from a wider industry perspective, we have to realize that it's cumulative. It's built on that consistency across channels and over time and not on single campaigns. So I think having clarity and consistency of message is really important. When it comes to like measuring trust and impact, and going on, around that, I think we have to realize that consumer trust is fragile, especially in the US. So I think that that's an interesting point to come across, that how do we address that fragility and how do we ensure that there's a significant percentage of claims that aren't misleading because a lot of them are at the moment. So how do we work away against that misleading claim and how do we support that with messages that are credible and can be backed up with science?
Yeah, I'd love to go into a bit more on that consumer dynamic and especially the US consumer. Did you want to add anything on the standards and making sure that that's being used in the right way and being understood in the right way by consumers?
Yeah, I do. I think that, if we think about how consumers view certifications and what they might find on pack, They pick up a package, there might be 4 or 5 different labels on every single pack. And how do we explain to them with legitimacy what each label means, and how, as Loraya mentioned, how are we collaborating together to ensure that there's a consistency and holistic view on what a sustainable product actually is? And, when they pick up that package, do they know with certainty that it's actually sustainable? And can they trust our certifications to tell us that it is? And I don't know that they can right now. I feel like there's a lot of mistrust.
Um, Great. Then maybe just staying on the trust and the differences between region. Kate, you mentioned that, for example, looking at Europe versus US, Europe was focusing more child labor, modern slavery, and then US on pesticides, poverty. Carlotta in the questions in the Q&A was asking if you had any more examples, and then Jackie, I'd love to then turn to you if you had any thoughts on the US versus Europe communication methods. Kate, did you have any other examples like that to share?
Yes. I'm thinking about some internal conversations we've had around like B2B audiences, and the impact of a procurement manager in the US a procurement manager versus a sustainability manager in the US versus in Europe. And it seems like, from what I can tell, in Europe, the sustainability manager, because there's such a heavy regulatory environment, they kind of have a lot more power and control within an organization. Whereas in the US, it seems like procurement managers are kings. So I think that like speaks a lot to what folks in both contexts expect. So the expectation in Europe being that sustainability is the bare minimum, versus in the US where it's like an add-on, a differentiator, a voluntary thing. So I think in that kind of way, the perspective of consumers also like kind of ripples out from there, where U.S. consumers have to be more discerning about what they're choosing because there isn't regulation or there are limited regulations about what the ingredients are, what components are in there, whether like how it was grown. Like how people were treated in the supply chains, whereas like some of those things just don't exist. GMOs don't exist in the same way in Europe as they do in the US. So I think it makes American consumers need to focus first and foremost. Like my theory about why the organic movement grew so quickly in the 90s when fair trade was in both markets at the same time is because Americans really needed to protect themselves, their children, and make sure that they're putting things in their body that they agree with and are knowledgeable about. So I'm hoping that now that some of those things, and there's a lot of great certifications out there, that we can really bolster fair trade and bring forth these other kinds of sustainability initiatives that also talk about how the farmers are treated, and more of like the human rights sides of things. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, Carlotta does it. Um, but no, thank you, Kate. I just Lori, yeah, do you want to add anything, Lori?
Just a quick thing on the
No.
science behind a lot of this. We've got some interesting studies coming in on nutrient density. And so talking about consumer confidence, like the ALR scary, like you say, it's about keeping my family safe. But I think there's another big shift here that we're seeing in the marketplace of how do I keep healthy? What does it quality of life look like? And so it's interesting. We've just really started having some interesting nutrient density coming in between, the difference that rock is making, regenerative organic.
Yeah. Thank you, Larry. That actually is a perfect moment to note that the next webinar in this series will be actually looking at those dynamics, like nutrition-led sustainability. How do those work together? So that'll be on the next one. So don't forget to sign up
Great.
through the form for anyone who might be interested, and we'll make sure to let you know when it's going live. Yeah, that dynamic is extremely interesting. Courtney, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the top of that, I was just at Sustainable Foods Conference I guess it was last week, yeah. And I think the intersectionality in Europe and the UK between nutrition and sustainability is growing. And there's a lot, Lorraine, happening in the UK around the new sustainable diets from the UK government. What does that look like? And so I think we'll see a lot more brands who are focused on food and agriculture. What's good to soil is good for the nutrition of the crop. And I think that science is starting to come through and filter through to consumers, which is amazing to see.
Yeah. Jackie, I did ask you that question from the start, but if you wanted to add anything now, and otherwise I'll come back to that question.
Yeah, no, just to come back to the EU versus
Yeah,
US,
perfect.
some of what Kate was talking about made me think about a different sort of angle, which is, the US is still very much a growth market, and that is definitely true when it comes to seafood. Seafood consumption is much smaller in the US than it is compared to other countries, and so we have sort of an added challenge of communicating sort of why it's important or why how seafood can play an important part of a healthy diet. But one of the things I wanted to say is, we talked about collaboration and how we sort of communicate about third-party eco labels. I actually wanted to shout out because we have a partnership with Fair Trade America as well as Non-GMO Project called Little Labels, Big Impact, where we are not communicating about our individual labels, but we're communicating about the benefits of these third-party certifications. And so that helps us, in sort of educate or communicate about what MSC is doing, but also about MSC in the broader picture of things, as well as Fair Trade America in the broader picture of things, like why are these certifications important? What role do they play? And really focusing on the credibility behind and the rigor behind these certifications. And so we've been working together for several years, and it's been a great way to reach our target consumer with the message that these are labels you can trust. There's so much that goes behind the scenes that goes on behind the scenes. And I think we need to be careful about oversimplifying it. We recognize that certifications can be very challenging and very complicated to understand. So really simplifying the messaging without sort of diminishing it or without, watering it down. So that's how we're understanding how to communicate in the US market versus in the EU, where there is, like Kate said, sustainability is base level. Here, we still have a bigger challenge ahead of us.
Yeah, because I mean, we've seen obviously a huge change in the past year, especially in the US, with words being banned, like words that we've used a million times in this webinar. You can't really use them anymore. Um, Not, I guess not necessarily a question, but I did want to just approach it. Maybe, Jackie, while I still have you, how has that changed the way that you communicate? How are you adapting to those changes that are being imposed on you, and any advice that you can give to anyone listening? And then maybe Kate, I'll turn to you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back again to making sure you're very clear about what your definition of sustainability is. There's lots of interpretations of the term sustainability, and it's also lost some of its meaning, and consumers are still very confused about what it means. And so being clear about when we communicate about it, what that means to us, what our standards are, what is behind the label, that's really how we are making sure that we're communicating about it in a clear way, in a credible way, and being very honest about what we do.
There were last questions as well, and I wanted to talk about more like, oh, sorry, Kate, I did want to talk to you about that. You as well.
As it relates to words, being like banned or perceived as too radical in the US. We're not changing. We're gonna keep saying climate change. We're gonna keep saying women's rights and gender equality. And that's a very intentional decision that we have made as an organization because at the end of the day, the most important people that we think about within our work are the farmers that we work with. They hold 50% of the decision-making power within our organization. And we have a responsibility to them to continue to amplify these social justice issues. So we're not changing. I understand there are different pressures for companies or other folks that have different kinds of risks. And I empathize with that, but we're luckily in the position where we don't have to. So we're not changing. So.
There's a woo in the in the comments for that. Thank you, Kate. I mean, on that point of brands, I'd love to ask a few last questions on sort of the wider ecosystem. How are you working with partners? Before going on brands, Loraya, I mean, if you want to talk a bit about, how do you work with brands, and you've said a little bit at the start already, but I also want to see how you bring in farmers, producers into the communication process itself, and how are they focusing on it? How are, was it Kate that you said, if I can't say it in front of a farmer then, or in front of a producer? So yeah, maybe from your side, Lorraine, how are you bringing in farmers into this whole dynamic?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it is connecting the dots. It's building community really taking those brands and retailers to the farm to understand, in the world of cotton, you've got someone that's worked for a big, textile company that's never been to a cotton farm to really understand the dynamics. So seeing is believing, the whole walk a mile in my shoe kind of thing. But education, it comes down to education and helping people connect the dots. And and that goes to the consumer as well. How do you make that connection real? So when we create forums, we do a lot of strategy. When we do our outreach to our brands, it's about educating what's going on, what are the real dynamics, and those are different regionally. But it boils down to education and helping a brand plan their strategy of what they're trying to accomplish, and really hopefully getting them on the field so they understand the dynamics. And again, how do they can't tell, again, you can't tell the truth if you don't know the truth. So it is about really connecting the dots. So in all of our forums and all of our calls, we're making sure farmers are on the calls with the brands, in the entire supply chain. It really is a relay race. I may grow it, I can't grow it on a maybe. And I need to pass it along that relay race in order for it to, make it intact and have the credibility and everything we've talked about along the supply chain. And so it's about strategy. It's about informed decisions and having good information. You can't make good decisions without good information. So there's all those kinds of things that you have to build into the DNA of really creating effective and strategic programs.
Thank you. Kate, was there anything from yourself? So also working with producers, in terms of how do you bring them into the communication, but then also going to the other side of your work. There was also a question by Jacqueline on, what are successful brand partnerships? So kind of both, what does
Yeah.
your success look like with producers, but then what does success look like with brands?
hmm I would say, so like I mentioned before, we are co-owned by farmers. This wasn't how fair trade started. This was a new thing that happened within our governance structure, and I'm super proud of it because it means that the decisions are made. They're at the table, and there's no other certification that does it quite like we do, and at such a large scale. And I mean, there are benefits and drawbacks to that, of course. It takes us a while to make decisions sometimes, and it is a negotiation process, and not everybody is always happy, but we do often meet in the middle, especially on things as sensitive as price. Yeah, it's neat being behind the scenes because you can see, okay, this is what these are the things that the producers want in different regions because they're not a monolith either. And this is what brands want. And okay, can we change the premium in this way or the minimum price in this way to sort of meet in the middle and make it viable for our market realities? So I would say that's a big way. On the communication side, we have KPIs internally about creating spaces for farmers to speak for themselves, and then also just to elevate their stories in general. So I would say we work directly with farmers so that they know their stories better than we can ever tell them. So it's really just like reducing barriers to make that happen. And along that vein, on the brand side, for the past few years, we've been running a campaign where we install public art on the sides of retailers in collaboration with brands. So we kind of tell this full supply chain story from the farmer to the retailer to the brand. And I've been surprised by how excited folks have been about that and the pride that folks have in telling the story of a specific farmer. You can see them, they're all over the US. And I would say it's created a culture both within our organization and within like many of our brand partners that they want to share those stories too. So I would say those have been some of the most powerful like moments of collective storytelling that we've done, in addition to some media relations work we've done as well.
Thank you, Kate. Courtney, and we have to wrap up, unfortunately. You can
Yeah.
see why we created a series rather than a one-off webinar. Courtney, maybe from your side, also just last closing thoughts on how to better work with brands or just the most important stakeholders.
Yeah, I think, well, I just maybe I'll wrap up and say that we work with brands a little bit differently, right? So I
Yeah.
think brands really value how Green Seal can help them future proof their products. So we regularly update our standards to account for the latest science or market advances. And that means that brands can certify, far ahead of the regulations. I think a really good example of this is PFAS. It's an area of growing concern amongst consumers and regulators. But because Green Seal prohibits their use of intentionally added PFAS, that they're already ahead of the game. So brands that work with us can confidently go to market and claim that they don't have this. And in flooring, it's a big issue because PFAS are added to flooring cleaning products because they're superb at cleaning floors. It's just it's a very useful chemical, and I think working with brands like Midlab and Spartan, who are huge in this flooring cleaning market in the US, they're able to innovate away from regulation and be able to be the first floor cleaning products on the market to say that they don't have PFAS, which is a great innovation. So I think, yes, the contextual stories around farmers and fishermen and is really important, but I think for other chemical based products like cleaning products and personal care products, being rooted in the science and in innovation is a really useful way for certification bodies to help brands move further faster and to talk about sustainability and toxicity and good for me in a different way.
Great. Jackie, any last closing thoughts on the last points raised, and then we'll have to close up.
Yeah, I think just, we've talked about greenwashing, green hushing, and I think it's easy to feel like silence is the safe thing to do, but I think it happens at the risk of demonstrating progress, which is important, which is too important to ignore. So yeah, I think or at MSC, we really encourage brands and partners and companies to be clear about their communication, to communicate proudly. And so I'm really grateful to the Innovation Forum for having this conversation. I think it's a great way to make sure that we are really shining the light on this issue and having an opportunity to have a dialogue about it.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you all. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Jackie, Kate, Lorraine, for joining us for the conversation. Thank you, everyone, for asking your questions. We will be continuing this, so please do get in touch with the team if you lost the link, or just let us know if you want to be a part of it. And we'll be hosting workshops, everything complimentary. So do get in touch and stay around. And yeah, if you want to know more about how we can work with you, do let us know as well. And yeah, just a big, big thank you, and see you at the
Thank
next
you as
one.
well. Have a
Thank you,
good day, everybody.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bye.
you.